And this is a very special episode. It's season 15, episode 28 with Amaury Séchet. He is also known as Deadalnix, and he is the developer who forked Bitcoin to create Bitcoin Cash and then started some interesting conversations within the big blocker community. And we're going to focus basically on the part of Bitcoin history that was not told. And the stories that never get heard because there's always this narrative of, oh, this side won, the other side did not, this side did this side did that. And I think Amaury is a developer and he was on this for mostly technical and ideological reasons. He pursued his own interests, and it's gonna be fun to find out more about what happened and what kind of conversations happened. Because, first of all, Amaury knew about the inflation bug in 2018 that happened in Bitcoin, and he participated in the process of fixing it as opposed to trying to exploit it to destroy Bitcoin. And he was also one of the first big blockers to figure out that Craig Wright is not Satoshi. And there's another story to be told about that. And then he forked off from Bitcoin Cash because he disagreed with some stuff, and now he has eCash or whatever, which is a fork of sorts. I'm not sure if it's entirely a fork, it's very different. But I'm gonna let you talk about all of these topics. It's very good to have you, Amaury.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
So, I know this sounds very generic, but how did you get involved in Bitcoin as a developer?
Uh, as a developer, actually quite late, maybe 2016 or so, uh, because it came to like I was involved in Bitcoin much earlier than that, but as a hobby, as a thing of interest. But it didn't seem like as a developer I had much to bring to the table. But around 2016, this is where like all these scaling debates and all of that started to happen and heat up. And this is something I have more expertise in, so I decided to jump in as a developer around that time.
So, what was the thing that you liked about this whole scaling debate? Was there a certain proposal that you preferred over others?
I mean, I'm gonna change the question a bit, and I'm gonna explain why. Like scaling is not something like you do this one solution and then boom, you've scaled and it's fixed, right? It's you have a system, there is a bottleneck somewhere, and you find a solution to remove the bottleneck, and then you need to move on to the next one. But obviously, the very obvious first bottleneck is the block size. It's relatively easy to change from a technical perspective. Then, obviously from a social one, it's a bit more complicated. You need to have the agreement of most of the community, which doesn't look like it's possible at this point. But I strongly disagree with people that are like, oh, like you just grow the block size forever and ever and ever, and it's just gonna work. No, at some point you're gonna run in another bottleneck, and it turns out that you actually do around 20 megs or so, you start running into other bottlenecks.
Interesting. So, you're saying that the limit right now, from a technical perspective, should be that of 20 megabytes, even with big blocks?
Yeah, up to about 20 megabytes, everything works fine with the current tech. To go further than that, you need to change a few things.
That's an interesting statement because, you are the maintainer of Bitcoin ABC, and there were also proposals such as Bitcoin XT and Bitcoin Unlimited
Mhm.
that were seeking to double the block size. I think in XT it was every year or every couple of years, and Bitcoin Unlimited was in favor of this idea of dynamic block size, of allowing the free market to basically decide what the block size will be for the next block. And you're more, I guess, moderate in this regard. You look at the technical specifications and you think how you can retain the decentralization and offer a bit of scalability.
Yeah, so there are technical solutions to go further than that, but you need to exploit them. So I'm not really opposed to dynamic block size system. I think it's actually a pretty good idea. But when you do that, you get to realize that now you are in a race against the usage of the network, right? Like you have to you have to implement those technical solutions to grow beyond 20 meg before the usage on the network is such as 20 meg is used. So that's a bit of a things you need to be conscious about. You know, I don't know who came up with that analogy. It's not me, but it's a very apt one. It's like the block size is like the speed limit. You know, say I want to go from France to Romania by car, let's say. So it takes a certain amount of time. And now you ask the question, oh, do you want to do that faster? Well, the obvious first bottleneck would be like you remove the speed limit or you increase the speed limit quite a bit on the highway, and then I can go faster and I'm going to arrive in Romania faster, right? And it's very clear that at the beginning it's going to work, but at some point it's going to get like very dangerous because the car is not suited anymore, and the infrastructure of the road and all of that is not secure anymore to drive at that speed. And then if you increase the limit even higher than that, then the car cannot even go at that speed. And so like there is literally no point in raising the limit, right? It's very much the same situation with the block size. Like if you grow a bit at the beginning, you're just going to be able to do bigger block for a while. But at some point, you're going to run into problems that you need to solve in some way if you want to go further than that. That's just not going to happen by itself.
That's a smart analogy, probably made by Greg Maxwell. I don't know, I'm joking. But you told me before we started recording that you were interested in extension blocks before you were interested in big blocks with hard forks. And the extension blocks are this proposal that allows you to soft fork basically something that's a lot like a sidechain, except that it's part of the client. And you can move coins back and forth between the main chain and the extension block.
Yeah. So Christopher Jeffrey made that proposal at the time, and I thought, you know, like technically, I think increasing the block size is just the simple stuff to do, but and this is more complicated. So on the technical front, it's a bit less appealing, but I also knew that a lot of people were opposed to hard fork and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, this is more likely to get traction and to get, you know, more people on board and actually, you know, make it work. So I worked on that for a while. But then there was this big like New York agreement that came up with Segwit 2x, and this proposal kind of lost traction. So, you know, sometimes that's the sometimes, you know, like the whole ecosystem goes in another direction, and then the proposal didn't have that much sense to activate.
But you also have an opinion on Segwit 2x, and you created Bitcoin Cash as a fork of Bitcoin specifically
Yeah. So
because
because Segwit 2x was like, okay, we activate Segwits, and then a few months later we activate the block size increase, and I was like, this is not gonna work. This is gonna work. This is gonna be a bait and switch, which it ended up being. So because I was like, this is not gonna work, and at the same time, I wanted, you know, a Bitcoin that scale. I was interested by. I'm interested by the more digital cash aspect of the whole system. So I was like, all right, you know, Segwit 2x is what people like, most big blocker, they were supporting that. And I was like, this is not going to work. This is bad strategy. The extension block did not get any traction because Segwit 2x kind of like, you know, vacuumed all the support it had. So I was like, okay, the only solution now is to have a minority fork of Bitcoin. And this is how I started working on BCH.
yeah, and prior to that, what was Bitcoin ABC about?
Bitcoin ABC has been created for that purpose.
Okay, for some reason I thought it emerged before BCH.
Well, you know, it has it has to be created before BCH if you want people to run it and even to deactivate BCH. But it was created a few months before BCH. So actually, this is not exactly true. Like the original purpose was to implement extension block. But then, you know, when it didn't work, I scrapped the extension block part of it and starting implementing the BCH fork, and this is what, you know, this is Bitcoin ABC happened.
So, how did you become the one to fork Bitcoin at the time? Why was it you? Why was it Bitcoin ABC that was the first client to run Bitcoin Cash and it wasn't
Mhm.
XT or Unlimited?
No, because XT and Unlimited, um, they wanted to be the main Bitcoin, like they wanted to be the Bitcoin, and they were not willing to. But I mean, they did not realize that their strategy was not good, and they were not so good, right? Like you get to admit that the strategy was not so good, and the way they were interacting with each other, it was very competitive and scared off a lot of people as well. They were unable to agree on various consensus parameter of the block size activation and um, so it was a mess and and those people they were not willing to do a minority fork because in a way it's an admission that they fucked up, right? Like they could not make what they wanted to do work.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, you're fine from the beginning with the idea of a minority fork? And what were the
Yeah.
miners or the businesses that supported Bitcoin Cash since day one?
Um, via BTC obviously mined the first block, so they were very supportive early on. Bitmain was as well. A few like services that were more cash oriented, which almost all have disappeared by now, but all the services that were more payment related, they supported BCH fairly quickly. Uh, because at the time we already had the problem that we have right now where the transaction fees are several dollar or euros or whatever, and it takes a long time to confirm and all of that. So there was a lot of interest in all the payment oriented side of the ecosystem.
Yeah, I recorded some interviews with business owners and exchange people who at the time were in favor of Segwit 2x when it first emerged. They even signed the New York agreement. But the moment they had Bitcoin Cash as the big block fork of Bitcoin, they realized, okay, we already have this. What's the point of Segwit 2x? And the way that they described it was that basically the Segwit 2x proposal failed because of Bitcoin Cash, which emerged. Do you think this is accurate?
No, uh, no, I think Segwit 2x was dead on arrival. Those people were deluding themselves. Uh, this is one thing. Like proponents of big block have had very serious flaws in their understanding of the game theory of Bitcoin, which small blocker were much better at this, and it was obvious. Like this stuff. Do you remember UASF? Um, where people were like effectively, I'm not gonna upgrade my node to something that's gonna increase the block size. I'm just gonna activate SegWit and I don't care about anything else. My node is gonna do that to do what the fuck you want. This was a very powerful move from a game theory perspective, and the the big block size as a whole really did not understand that because they were like, well, the white paper says that the hash power decide blah blah blah. So first, it's not what the white paper says. Most of those talks are based on the misunderstanding of what's written in there. But even if it was what was written in there, it doesn't matter, right? Like what's written on some paper cannot change the nature of reality and the economic incentives of the game. Um, so even if this was what was written in there, it doesn't matter. The game theory works such as those people. So there is a very good analogy for that. You know that that game, quote unquote, that stupid game they do in some movies, where you have two cars that are moving toward each other pretty quickly, right? And effectively, the first person that decide to turn to avoid the other car is gonna lose in some way. right? This kind of scene happens in many movies.
Yeah, that's
And
Too Fast to Furious in a
yeah,
nutshell.
Fast and Furious is a good example of that. There are example of that in Fast and Furious. And so um, people who work on game theory, they have studied this kind of situation, and ask themselves, like, what should you do? Like, how do you maximize your chance of winning that game? Um, and the way you maximize your chance of winning that game is that you rip the steering wheel of the car, you show it through the window, and you throw it away. Because now your opponent knows that you have no other option. You limited your own option, right, by doing that. And you did so in a very visible manner so that your opponent knows that you don't have the option to steer away anymore, right? So now what's gonna happen is either we crash into each other or you avoid me. And this is what the USF people did. They understood that whole game theory. And at the time, very few people did understand that on the big block side of things. And I tried to explain people like Anthony Ziegler also made a presentation about that at the time, but most people, they were just like, no, they were not willing. They were like, in their mind, like the white paper say this or say that, so it has to happen that way. And this is not how reality works. And I can write a white paper saying, oh, we're going to create a digital cash with, I don't know, 500 gigabyte blocks, and it's all going to work fine, right? But I cannot write software that does that properly right now. It's not because I write it in a white paper that it's the way the world operates. You cannot rid yourself of economic incentives and game theory and engineering constraints and all of that by writing stuff on a paper.
Yeah, so speaking of cars driving very fast towards each other, in the movie Too Fast to Furious, at the end of the film Too Fast to Furious, there's a coin join happening with hundreds of cars trying to obscure two of them that were being chased by the police. And basically, you have the entire community of street racers trying to hide two of them that were being searched. And today's sponsor is Wasabi Wallet, which does exactly that with your Bitcoin. Go to wasabiwallet.io, download the client, and you're going to be able to send your Bitcoin to that wallet. It automatically does coin joins. For amounts lower than 0.01 BTC, you pay no coordination fee. And also, after you mix your coins for multiple rounds, which by the way, don't just divide your coins, but also consolidate them. So that's an interesting use case also. You also have a buy anything button there at the top, which allows you to order anything that you want, anywhere that you want. It's a backend that's routed via Tor to ShopInBit, which is a store that has more than 1 million products. You tell them what you want, you tell them where to deliver, and you can pay with your mixed Bitcoin so that there's no extra FUD that you will not be able to use Bitcoin once you make it private. Check out Wasabi Wallet, download it today from wasabiwallet.io. It's pretty great. And what do you think about privacy? And did you
Well,
get
wait,
the
yeah,
chance?
before that, what a brilliant transition. That was a great move right there. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, what do you think about privacy in Bitcoin and CoinJoins?
I mean, it's better than nothing. It's not as good as what you have on Zcash and Monero and stuff like that, but it's it really depends what's your use case and what the level of privacy that you are looking for, right? But it's already something. It's better than nothing. And it's probably enough for any kind of, low motivation attacker, I would say, right? So the merchant, for instance, cannot know how many Bitcoins do you have. Um, whoever you pay to, and someone observing the blockchain cannot probably like retrace your coins. But someone that has, complex algorithm able to do, fancy statistics and whatnot, and that is very motivated to trace your fund is probably going to be able to do it.
Yeah, there are different reasons why you should use privacy and CoinJoins. I'm not gonna tell you exactly which. I'm gonna explain to you why I use it myself. Sometimes people send me donations to an address, and I don't know who these people are. I don't want to know who these people are, and I don't want to use the coins under their identity. So it's also good for myself, it's also good for them. And
Mm.
it's a very solid use case for using CoinJoin.
Yep.
And I'm not sure if you have an opinion on Wasabi in particular. When I pointed this out to Roger in 2 interviews ago last week, he told me about Cash Fusion, and I did my homework and I realized that Wabi Sabi, which is the engine behind Wasabi 2.0, is inspired partly by Cash Fusion. What it does a bit better is that, Bitcoin has small blocks and you need to be more efficient with block space, and it has better compression of data. So that's what Wasabi does better than Cash Fusion. I'm not sure in terms of anonymization what the major difference is, but I understand. I'm not sure if Cash Fusion
I would
also does
expect them to be pretty
consolidations.
similar. I've not like digged into the topic enough to give you specific numbers, but knowing roughly how both work, I would expect the level of privacy to be similar.
Okay. Anyway, we were talking about ABC before this,
Mm-hmm.
and you mentioned how you knew that Segwit 2X was going to fail because the UASF people were better understanding the incentives.
Yeah.
So you knew from the beginning that Bitcoin Cash was going to be a minority fork and not the real Bitcoin. But how did
Yeah.
you feel when it was being promoted as the real Bitcoin?
Uh, I mean, I feel that it's a bit antagonistic. The way I went at it is like, it's to me, like all those fork of Bitcoins, they have an equal um I don't know, right? It's not a right, it's not the right word, but I cannot find a better word right now. But they have maybe an equal legitimacy to use the word Bitcoin. But once you're like, this is the real Bitcoin, now you're starting to antagonize everybody else. I think it's perfectly fine to have different group of people that actually value different things. I mean, it's it's so bizarre, to have to convince everybody that your stuff is the real stuff. Why can't there be two flavors of Bitcoin that went into different direction because the community that follow both have different set of values? That's so I've been a proponent that this is a flavor of Bitcoin, if you wish, like this is a kind of Bitcoin, but all this energy that I've been spent over what is the real Bitcoin, I think could have been spent much more, much more wisely by the community on both sides.
Yes, and you also mentioned that there was an excessive obsession with the white paper and pointing
Yeah.
out some aspects from it, especially I think the first two paragraphs, peer-to-peer electronic cash system, and maybe some old quotes by Satoshi that were being interpreted. But people don't realize
Well,
that when they say
well,
this is the original Bitcoin,
I'm
there's
gonna
so
pause
much.
there 1 minute if you allow me, because actually, I think the beginning of the white paper is quite important, not because of what it described, but kind of like it described the goal, right? Like what Satoshi was trying to do. So in some way, if as long as you are pursuing that goal, and you have a legitimacy saying that, hey, like I'm making some kind of Bitcoin system. Um, That being said, it doesn't necessarily follow that all the technical details are right. And actually, we know that many of the technical details in the white paper are not right. So, um, and if Satoshi say, oh, like this part of the system works this way, but we realize that the incentives are not so much that that it works in that way, then it doesn't work in that way, right? Like it's not a religious text. I mean, kind of is by now, right? People are treating it like it is, but I, I think it's a bit of a mistake. It creates a lot of tension, for no good reason.
Yes, but there's so much in the white paper that does not describe what Bitcoin became. And when people make the
Mm-hmm.
claim this is the original version, they don't use the 2009 client. They use BIP32 wallets, they use maybe BIP38 or BIP39 for encrypting the private key. They use a lot of stuff that was created along the way. And they use the 21 million cap that is not described in the white paper. They have mining pools that were not.
Yeah, there are a lot of stuff that are not described in the white paper. There are even stuff that are described in the white paper that are wrong, right? So for instance, the white paper says that the node followed the longest chain, whereas the node actually follow the heaviest chain, like the chain with the most proof of work, which is not necessarily the longest chain, right? I can
Yeah, that's
produce a
correct
chain
because
with very low proof of work that is much longer than the current chain, and the nodes won't select it, and they're right to do so, right? But this is what the white paper described. But this is not what even the original client, maybe not the original client actually, but this is one of the first things that was fixed, in the client, is that you need to follow the chain with more proof of work, not the chain with the most blocks, because all those blocks are not, don't all have the same weight. So there are a few stuff in the white paper that are flat out wrong.
yeah, I was going to
Also,
point out.
it mentioned like how many leading zeros there are for proof of work, but this is not a proof of work. And actually, that was a funny. There is a funny stuff that happened about that in the last court case with Craig Wright, where he was actually maintaining that it worked like it's described in the white paper, and Adam Back was a witness, and obviously Adam Back is a major figure, in the invention of proof of work or its evolution toward what was used in Bitcoin. So obviously he knows how that works, and it was like, no, this is what is written in the white paper, but this is not actually how it works. And Adam Back was obviously correct in that instance. So there are a few stuff in the white paper that are flat out wrong. So, like treating it like it's an inviolable document is a bit of a mistake. And that doesn't, it's very funny because when you start to say that, people get very enraged about that, right? It's like, oh, does he dare saying something bad about the white paper, but it doesn't remove from the achievement, right? Like the white paper and the original Bitcoin client, with all of its problem, is like an amazing step forward compared to everything that existed before. And that what matters here. And like pretending that there are not some details that are wrong, I don't think helps in any kind of way promote the achievement. I don't know if I'm explaining my idea clearly, right? But it's like, okay, the stuff is amazing, right? But there's few details around there that are not quite right, but it's amazing anyway, right? And you don't have to pretend that those details that are not quite right don't exist for the stuff to be amazing. It's amazing, just just take it as it is. And the first time you do something, you never get it perfect right from the first time. It's true of everything. It's also true of the white paper. There are a few mistakes in it.
I also agree with what you said about Bitcoin being a mission, being something that is an aspiration that we have to figure out how to develop to make it scale for the rest of the world. Because what it did back in 2009 was to solve the double spending problem, which was huge, and combine elements that were already there but not used in this creative way to create
Yeah.
this form of electronic money. But we should keep in mind why Satoshi invented this, and I agree with you that the white paper should have this aspirational dimension to it. But also
Yeah.
wanted to point out the fact that Bitcoin Cash has had its. This is on the topic of the longest chain or the chain with the most proof of work. Bitcoin Cash has had its halving yesterday, and
Yes.
it had some hiccups in the first 24 hours with blocks being mined after 2 hours.
Well, that happens. That happens, right? Because typically, so there is a price ratio between BCH and BTC, and miner are gonna put hash power in between the two, usually in proportion of the price ratio, right? Because that's the profitable thing to do, really. There's no other reason. So when suddenly BCH cut its emission by half, it becomes really unprofitable to mine BCH versus mine BTC. And therefore, most of the hash that is on BCH move to BTC. And you're going to see the opposite in in a few days, when Bitcoin is going to halve later this month. You're going to see a lot of block mine very quick on BCH for a while until the difficulty on BCH adjusts. That's how it is. That's what happens.
Yes. So I have to present an ad, and after that we get to the spicy stuff. I think this was a very cool introduction, and I'm happy that we laid out these terms because it's gonna get even more interesting from now on, so stay tuned. So this advertisement is for hodling.ch.
Excuse me,
It,
maybe you want to repeat the advertisement because I
yeah,
coughed.
you sneezed. This advertisement is for hodling.ch, which is a service that helps large holders and companies set up their own multi-sigs and create this trustless or trust minimized setup in which they don't have to trust third parties with holding their funds. I know that ETFs and all of these large corporations buying Bitcoin today are trusting Coinbase, but you shouldn't be doing that. And at Hodling SA, we're here to simplify the complexities of Bitcoin security, providing peace of mind through a secure, private, and self-managed environment. In the Swiss tradition of precision and security, our services assist you in setting up, maintaining, and operating a self-custodial Bitcoin infrastructure, from the selection of multi-signature configurations and hardware wallets to ensuring your setup is robust and tailored to your needs. Go to hodling.ch to find out more. And I think at this point we should get into the inflation bug that happened in 2018, and which I think
Okay.
has been maybe hidden under the rug. It happened, and then people tried to not talk about it. Then Matt Corallo came out and took credit and apologized for it. And then John Newberry also said, no, it was my fault because I was in charge of auditing the code and I didn't catch it. And
I mean, I
this
can tell you it
inflation,
was not obvious. A lot of people looked at that code without seeing the bug, including me originally. The first time I saw that code, I didn't see the problem in it. So,
yeah, let me share the screen so we can take a look at this. If I remember how to do it. Oh, I found it. And it's this. So we have CV 2018-17144. We have a full disclosure of it on the Bitcoin Core website. And it happened on September 18th of 2018 with Bitcoin Core versions 0.16.3 and 0.17.0 RC4, which featured a denial of service component and a critical inflation vulnerability. This was huge at the time. It was reported by several developers working on Bitcoin Core, as well as projects supporting other cryptocurrencies, including ABC and Unlimited on September 17th, as a denial of service bug only. However, we quickly determined that the issue was also an inflation vulnerability with the same root cause and fix. And if you scroll to the timeline, you see that on September 17th of 2018, and all the times are in UTC, Universal Time C. I'm not sure what it stands for. So at 14:57, anonymous reporter reports crash bug to Peter Willie, Greg Maxwell, Vladimir van der Laan of Bitcoin Core, Deadalnix of Bitcoin ABC, and SickPig of Bitcoin Unlimited. So you're part of this. You found out firsthand. On
yes.
September 17, 14:57, you got an email probably. And about 17 minutes later, Greg Maxwell shared the report with Corey Fields, Suhas Daftwar, Alex Morkos, and Matt Corallo. And it was in 2 hours and 30 minutes that Matt Corallo identified the inflation bug. So, can you tell me some stories about that day and what happened more exactly?
I mean, I don't know very more I can say. Like this report is pretty thorough, but yeah, everybody was shuffling around, trying to find out, how the crash happened. And effectively, when we figure out how the crash happened, we also figured out that if you do it differently, you might cause the node software to accept um, double spends effectively, which would create an inflation bug. Which is often the case, like often you find vulnerability, you're like, oh, like the system crashes or behaves wrong when you do that. And then when you discover, what is the actual mechanism that causes that, then people can get creative and be like, okay, if you make it crash not that way, but in a slightly different way, actually, you can cause something pretty harmful. But I think it's a good example to show that, like, even though the different community were throwing feces at each other's, like figuratively, obviously, um, the developer usually have been more cool-headed and able to cooperate on this kind of stuff. Because it's obvious that everybody involved in there have the skills and the potentiality to damage the other network, right? But the Bitcoin core developer decided not to do it toward the BCH node and vice versa. So, I don't know. I think it's speak well of the engineering community in general that is working on those systems and put a fair amount of time and effort trying to make sure they work right.
I think you're being modest right now because, or maybe that there's a wrongful perception of hatred between the two communities, or maybe that the marketing made it seem as such. Because you had basically the opportunity to kill Bitcoin on that day. You
I don't know. It would
could
have
exploit
killed
the
it,
bug.
but it would have been like really bad. Yes.
You could exploit the bug. You could cause an emergency hard fork. You could cause a split in the community, maybe, with those who are late at upgrading.
Well,
And
yeah,
there,
plus reputational damage, right? Like people that are like, okay, I'm gonna hold my Bitcoin forever and never send them. When the system start crashing left and right, they may reconsider what they're doing. So certainly there would be like economic damage as well.
yeah. So why did you decide to help? Why were you collaborative in this situation? I guess you could get famous for being the guy who destroyed Bitcoin.
Yeah, but then what? Like Craig Wright is famous for having produced the industrial scale volume of fake documents, and it doesn't really help him. Like I'm not involved in that to be famous, right? I'm involved in that because I was not too happy the direction BTC was going in, and so I wanted to open a different path and see where that goes. Like I don't see destroying BTC or damaging it. I don't think it would have destroyed it, but it would have certainly caused some damage. I don't see that would have been helping the cause very much, right? Plus, you get to think this is a recurring game, right? Like this kind of event, this is not the only time this happened, even though this one was much more severe than other times. But it happens a few times that either we reported vulnerability to the core guys or they did report vulnerability to us. And that helped both community, to work in that way.
It's a different world, I guess. The communication between developers as opposed to what we see on Twitter.
Yeah, and even when it comes to security generally, like everybody is much more cautious about what they do and making sure that they behave reasonably. Um, because also what happened is that you only have one reputation, right? And if people share security vulnerability with you and you start doing random shit with it, then people are not gonna share vulnerability with you going forward, right? And maybe you get famous for it, but also it's a bit of it's not a great position to be in, right? Like you sold your reputation for that and you cannot buy it back.
I also have to ask you because this inflation bug was not the cause of a soft fork. It was just the cause of a poorly rewrite of the code in an upgraded client, right?
Yeah, it was an optimization about transaction validation to do transaction validation more efficiently. that Matt Carlo made, and in very specific condition, it would behave wrong. But it's not, it's not that obvious really reading the code that it would be that way. I mean, the core people, they reviewed the code, and then we reviewed the code when we backported it from core, and Bitcoin Unlimited did the same, and everybody read the code. At least two people in each team read the code, and nobody saw it at first, So it was not, it was really a subtle thing. But that's
Yeah,
also, that's also the problem with security related software, is that, like any detail that you get wrong can often be exploited in ways that can be catastrophic.
where I'm trying to get right now is that they're advocates of ossification in Bitcoin, and they say, no, we don't need to implement more soft forks because they can add side
Yeah, in
effects
that
or
case, that was not
unwanted.
even a soft fork. So if you say we don't implement any more soft fork, you can still have this kind of problem.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. That you don't need a new soft fork. All you need is just bad code for a new version of the client.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say, I mean, obviously in the balance of probability, right, that it's probably less likely that this kind of stuff happen in a soft fork, because um, not because, not because for technical reason, but when you do consensus level code, like you do when you do a soft fork or hard fork for that matter, everybody is going to be super duper careful, extra paranoid and everything, right? And when you touch as a part of the code, um, people may not be as paranoid, right? And for good reason, right? Because otherwise you wouldn't be doing anything, and the software would just, rot and become worse and worse over time. But that means that you can have some subtlety that's sneaking, yeah.
And it's interesting to observe the timeline. I'm going to share the screen once again to show it to people watching this. I hope it's interesting for you, by the way. So this was reported at 2:57 p.m. and by 8:30, so this was in about 6 hours, less than 6 hours, Matt Corallo spoke with the CTO and CEO of Slushpool. I guess this is Slush and Stick. And they shared a patch with disclosure of the denial of service. Slushpool was the first pool to upgrade, and from this point on, it went to all the miners. They did the same. And then they released on the mailing list in 2 days an additional message urging people to upgrade, and this was written by Peter Willey. This is an example of when Bitcoin consensus can become centralized, because everyone agrees that this is terrible. Everyone knows that this is bad. So they're going to upgrade as soon as possible. And
Yeah, but I don't think this is necessarily a proof of centralization, right? Like the miners and exchange and whatnot, they're gonna run the core people's code or our code when we fix it, because a similar process happened on our side. Um, because there was some trust that was established, right? But this software is open source, and those people have no leverage whatsoever, and we have no leverage whatsoever deciding what kind of software a third party are gonna run. Uh, to a great extent, we don't even have an exhaustive list of people who run the software, right? Like we know some of them, but many of them we don't know. And this is why, at some point, Peter Willey posted a public statement, because it's like, well, right? We contacted the people we know, but, there are 10 times as many people we don't know. So you need to reach them somehow. It's okay, right? I think people have crazy idea about decentralization, but this is what it looks like in practice. If those people start doing nefarious stuff, then people are not going to run their code anymore. They're going to move to run something else.
it's very interesting how this works. And maybe that I worded this in a wrong way, or maybe it was the right way to get you to explain it better. But it's certainly fascinating how there is a degree of trust, and there is a trust in the reputation of the developers, and you know that they have
Mhm.
a good record, and based on that, you're going to run their code or not run their code, because not everyone is able to verify. In Bitcoin, we like to say don't trust, verify, but how many people actually have the competence to verify everything?
Yeah,
And even if
plus,
you do, how much time do you have
yeah.
to verify?
Yeah, exactly. There is so much time that you have, but there is also when there is a security vulnerability like that, that is pretty serious. You usually tell the detail of the security flow on a need-to-know basis, right? Because what's going to happen if you start blasting the message to everybody, hey, there is a vulnerability, here's how it works, and all of that, um, it's going to leak and someone is going to attack the network. So what you try to do is like contact the people that you know and that trust you and be like, look, there is, a security problem. We have a patch, please run that. And in a few days, we publish all the details when we are confident and if people have upgraded so that it's not a major concern anymore.
Yeah, let's move on to the next hot topic, which is you figuring out that Craig Wright is not Satoshi. And back in the early days of Bitcoin Cash, you were attending these big blocker events. And
It
I
was
think
even like before, it was before Bitcoin Cash. It was so I went to the US for a while to meet Christopher Jeffrey for when I was interested by the extension block mechanism, and it was roughly at the time where um, a lot of very prominent figures started pushing for Craig, right? There was like John Matonis and Gavin Andresen and like a few big name in the space, Jan Grieg as well. Like a few people were like, okay, like this is the guy, and we're like, really, this is the guy? It seems like this is not how we imagine the guy to be, right? And at the same time, the guy doesn't want to publish the proof, so we're like, oh, that's a bit suspicious. So let's try a bit of an experiment, right? So we discussed the situation while I'm in San Francisco with Christopher, and we're like, okay, we have to ask this guy about some design decision that have been made in Bitcoin that nobody really understands, right? Like nobody can make sense. So if the guy is really Satoshi, he's going to be able to tell you, oh, yeah, I did that because XYZ, but it turned out that it doesn't work. So no, this is why this feature is weird and nobody uses it, right? And we decided to ask about outcode separator, which is um, a strange opcode that doesn't have any obvious use cases. It seems like it would have some use cases when you look at it at first, but it turns out that the vast majority just plain don't work. So like, okay, we're gonna ask him about that. And it turns out that a few weeks later there is a conference in Harlem that I'm supposed to go to, and John Matonis was supposed to speak at that conference, but when come his turn to make his presentation, he actually does a bait and switch and brings Craig Wright on stage. And so Craig Wright, like, the presentation is like 5 minutes of John Matonis, and then it's a Craig Wright presentation. So Craig Wright is at that conference. So I'm like, okay, we discussed that with Christopher like a couple of weeks ago. So I'm gonna ask the guy, right? And so I asked the guy about opcode separator, and his answer was like, okay, you can use it in this and this and that way. And I'm like, okay, cool, because usually in those kind of conditions I play dumb. Like there is no way to be confrontational or anything. Like just let the people speak, and you're gonna learn way more. So you play dumb and you listen, and you're like, oh yeah, yeah, and but then I start thinking about his answer, and I'm like, no, I cannot use opcode separator to do all the thing that he says it's useful for, and so I discussed that with Christopher Jeffrey back, on online. We have a chat, and he comes to the same conclusion as I do. Like we cannot use that opcode in to do the stuff that Craig Wright pretend he can do with it. So that was a very clear sign that it was just like throwing random stuff at the wall, hoping that sticks, and it's gonna stick for most people. But when you do that with engineer that know the system work quite well, it just doesn't work.
interesting. So this was 2016 that you realized that Craig Wright is not
Maybe early
Satoshi.
2017.
Yeah, at the time, I think people like Roger Ver were still very positive that he's
Yeah,
Satoshi.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Was there any other moment like this that you had with him, and when you said, "Okay, I'm done with this guy. I don't want to listen to him"?
Well, after that, the guy, I was, pretty uninterested by the guy after that, right? Because I had done what I could do to give him the best shot to prove his case, and he did not. So, but people kept throwing me back on my lap, so I had to deal with him on many, many other topics, and each one of them proved to be like a similar story. There was the whole transaction ordering, there was selfish mining, there was like plenty of subject like that where he liked to adopt, he liked to take subjects that are quite technical to understand, like selfish mining. And so most people are not going to be able to read the selfish mining paper and just understand what it is about and make sense of it, right? Or follow the math that are in it. So so it can make like very complicated sounding explication about why everybody is wrong about selfish mining, and I am Satoshi and I know better. And it works on a lot of people, right? And you end up having to explain things that, well, like what Craig Wright says is not right, but your explication sounds just as much complete gibberish as, to a layman, it sounds complete gibberish, just the same as Craig Wright does, right? Except Craig Wright says it very confidently, and you say it with like all the caveat, and like, oh, okay, if we make that assumption, then like, because you try to be precise in your explication and your wording, and so people that are easily swayed are gonna side with Craig, right? And that was a complete nightmare to deal with for the time that I was involved with in BCH.
Why do you think that the fork between BCH and BSV happened in 2018, in December, if I'm not mistaken?
November, but yeah. So yeah, what about it? Why did it happen?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like for a while everyone who was into a big block version of Bitcoin was on the same page, or were they not? Was there always a
Oh
conflict?
no, oh no, no. There was effectively three big faction from the start, right? So when we created BCH, okay, so the people that had the same understanding about how the system works and the game theory behind it and stuff like that, like joined BCH pretty early on. But when Segwit 2x failed, uh, two group joined, right? And there was the Craig Satoshi group, that joined at that point, and there was like a group that I'm not sure to call it, but it was like Roger Ver and Bitcoin Unlimited, and uh, like there is a group of people there that don't really have a name that joined, and those three groups, they never really like coalesced very well. There was never a great because see, so the Craig Wright Satoshi group of people, it's very obvious why there was let's say a disagreement with them. But the other group, they came back in BCH, but this is not what they wanted, right? They wanted the Segwit 2xing to activate. They wanted big block on the main chain of Bitcoin, and this is what they've been working on for several years. And what they did fail, and so they come back to BCH. So to begin with, many of them they are there because they have nowhere else to be, but they really, this is not where they wanted to be. And the second stuff is that they have all those ideas that led them to implement the strategy that ultimately ended up not working, because there is no big block on BTC today. But they were like, okay, it didn't work because there is this great conspiracy with like, whatever, right? Like everybody is conspirating against them, and those people are very powerful and well connected and whatnot. And this is why the whole thing failed. So there was zero reconsideration of, well, we didn't use the right strategy and we didn't quite understand how the game theory worked there. There was no self-reflection about that. So when they came in with all those ideas that made them fail the first time, pre-packaged, and ready to be deployed on BCH, which they won't, and this is what happened to BCH. This is why it went from about 12% of BTC to 1%, and this is why we ended up leaving, because dealing with those group of people was just I was spending all my time dealing with the tension with those group of people rather than implementing something that is good and that I want the world to see. So eventually, this is what led to the creation of eCash.
In my mind at the time, there was only one faction that was super active on Reddit, especially r/BTC, complaining about, first of all, censorship on our Bitcoin,
So
because
the
that's
faction
how.
on RBTC was mostly, I would say, like the Broadriver Bitcoin Unlimited faction, which still doesn't have a good name. But they were like, people that were all about Craig Wright in there. I was involved a bit in there, but it was mostly the OG, I would say like OG big blocker, right? Faction that was in there. And as you mentioned, they were complaining about censorship and all of that. And to some extent, they have the right to complain about it, because I think some of the stuff that were done were, not quite right. Let's put it that way. But they did not realize that it was not the only reason, and it was not even the main reason why they were unable to deploy big block on BTC, at least in my opinion. I think they made very bad strategic mistakes. They did not understand what they were playing with well enough. And obviously, like all those, all those censorship events and whatnot, they did not help. But I think it's a mistake to, like, it's a bit of a conspiracy theory, to be honest, to be all about that.
Yep. I also want to ask you about CoinSpice, because that was another spicy topic with Colin and Vin Armani and Peter Reason. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name. And also the scaling Bitcoin conferences, because they were a big deal at the time. But before this, I gotta present a message from someone who went to the scaling Bitcoin conferences and speaks about them and quotes them and says he has the solution to all of it. So this ad goes out to all French large blockers. Are you French? Are you a large blocker? If so, you may enjoy Drivechain, where you use BTC on a large block L2 with no Australians to get in your way. Did you know that Paul Storz, creator of Drivechain, is part French? His mother's father is from Alsace, where the Stéphane family dwelt since perhaps the 1200s. Wow, that's a great fact. Funding is available for talented persons of French lineage. No tax required. Tax? Oh, that's a bad word. I'm Paul Storz and I approve this message. Or do I? Anyway, I hope this was funny.
Yeah. Also, I think Drivechain is very interesting, and kind of like big block. It's been painted in the bad light, but it's something people should look into.
Oh, I think right now it's the only proposal that can onboard everyone in the world in a non-custodial way. The custodian is the miner, but you can already say this, right? About your transactions. You have to trust them not to double spend.
Not as much, but yeah. I mean, the miner cannot double spend because the node are not going to accept the block. The miner can block your transaction, right? Like decide to just not mine them, and they will never go through if they do that. But they cannot double spend your coins.
Anyway, CoinSpice, do you still talk to these guys, or do you have any spicy stories with them?
It depends which one, but yeah, I still have good relationship with many of them. I don't know too much about Spacey stories. Like most of what the Coinspace people did was in public, so anyone can anyone can know about it. That's not very secretive.
I
But
think that was the most fun project in Bitcoin Cash,
yeah,
honestly.
that was really fun. Yeah, that was a group I really enjoyed quite a bit. And I think those were the people that really got it, because yeah, they were not just fun; they were like a bunch of smart group of people. It's a bit unfortunate that that group was not ultimately the one that ended up driving BCH future, but yeah, it's what happens.
Yeah, and anyway, the message from Paul Stores, I guess, is some sort of job offer because he said, "Are you French? Are you a large blocker? You might enjoy Drivechain." So he's basically saying, "Oh, you should work on this. I'm gonna pay you." I don't know. You can reach out to him, I guess.
So right now I'm working on eCash, and obviously it doesn't have the same network effect as BTC or BCH could enjoy, but I think from a text perspective, it's much more interesting. And we'll see if it catches on, and if it doesn't, then we're gonna have to think about doing something else. But I think I think there are more stuff to be done there, and actually many of the ideas that we have in there are similar to Drivechain, but because we are less constrained, we can do more interesting things. Like so, the big problem with Drivechain and all similar system is the reverse peg, right? So you can send the idea of Drivechain. Maybe I should explain a bit for people that may not know, but the idea of Drivechain is that you can have like different Drivechain, effectively, right? That are also kind of like blockchain, but with different rules. And you can move your Bitcoin from the main Bitcoin blockchain to a drive chain and do stuff in there and then send them back on the main chain. And the reverse peg problem is, how do you send the coin back from the drive chain to the main chain, right? This is the reverse peg problem. And it's a very difficult problem, and there are many different ways to solve this that come with various different trade-offs. And what Drivechain is making is that they are using a system of consensus with the miner, but the problem is now you have two mining chains that have to come to consensus. And the long story short, it takes a very long time. And there are ways to work around that, but ultimately it takes a very, very long time to do the reverse peg. And the thing that we do on our site, so we call that subnet, but the idea is very similar. You can have subnet, which are other chain with other consensus rule, exactly like before. But we don't use the same techniques to do the reverse peg. We use another consensus algorithm that is called Avalanche instead of using just Nakamoto consensus. And that allows the reverse peg to be significantly faster.
So basically, you're experimenting something else with the Bitcoin code base. Is that an accurate description?
Yeah.
No, I
Actually,
can
well,
respect
like
that,
a few of the stuff that we're doing are hard fork, but remarkably little. Like we are closer in terms of consensus rule to BTC than BCH is at this point, for instance. All the stuff that we're doing as Avalanche, for instance, is all soft fork.
So does any of this work on Bitcoin in theory?
In theory, like it's not a technical problem, but it changes the nature of the system quite a bit, and I don't think the BTC people would want to adopt that technology.
What is so radically different that will never make it end up in Bitcoin?
So effectively, we use two consensus algorithms, right? We use the Nakamoto consensus that exists in Bitcoin, and it works the same way in eCash. And we use the Avalanche consensus algorithm, which is a different consensus algorithm that comes with different trade-offs. Obviously, one of the plus side is that it's way, 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 way faster, right? It can come to consensus over the network in like 2 seconds, roughly, give or take. It's gonna depend on the specifics and how much node agree upon when they start the consensus algorithm. But even when they are in disagreement in 2 seconds or so, they can converge toward the solution, which is great, right? Because the Bitcoin system, it takes a multiple of 10 minutes to do that. So it's significantly faster. Obviously, you never get anything for free, right? So there is a couple of downsides. But I would say the main downside is that you don't have an historic trail. Like you don't have an historic artifact of the consensus like you have with a blockchain, right? Like I can go away in the woods or in the mountains or wherever for like 5 years without a computer. And I can come back and run my computer and run my Bitcoin node, and it's gonna catch up with the chain and know, and be consensus with everybody, right? You don't need to observe what happened to know what the consensus is. You can go after the fact and look at the artifact that's been left behind and deduce what the consensus was at the time and follow that. Avalanche does not do that, right? So if you want to know what is the consensus with Avalanche, you need to be there live participating in it. After the fight, you have to trust someone that's going to tell you. And this is why we don't move like purely to Avalanche. We use a combination of the two, right? So that you can still catch us on later. You still have this trail and this blockchain. But because we can come in agreement on the network on specific question very, very quickly, one of the things that we can do, for instance, is when a new block is found, well, it's going to be distributed on the network, and the different nodes are going to update the tip of the chain, like they do on any Bitcoin style network. But then they're going to run an avalanche round on the tip of the chain between themselves, right? And all the nodes that are there are like, okay, what is your tip? I have a new tip. This is that one. Tack, tack, tack. And they agree. And if everybody agree that the new tip is whatever block it is, then they're not going to accept a reorg of that because they know that this alternative chain has been produced fraudulently after the fact, which is the kind of thing I think is a good thing because it's better for the user. The network is more predictable. But I think this is something that most people in the BTC ecosystem would refuse, right? They would want the pure proof of work system. They don't want this kind of locks and whatnot. Does that
To
make
me, it
sense?
sounds a bit like something I've heard in terms of using zero knowledge proofs to compress data and basically have that bit of data that verifies if the state of the blockchain is correct, and you can synchronize from that one as opposed to downloading the entire history.
So
Is it
it's not
similar?
quite the same because we still have the entire history, but we can come up in agreement on stuff live, like right away in 2 seconds. And the trade-off is that there is no trail behind. So if you're not there, you're going to have to, if you're not there when the agreement is made, you're going to have to wait 10 minutes for the next block for all those decisions to be packaged into something that you can follow. But so it's very different from the zero knowledge stuff, but it's similar in a way that, it puts a twist on the original idea that makes it better in some way. But that also makes it quite different in nature in such a way that maybe purists are gonna disagree with it,
Yeah, I think the first time I heard about eCash, and I don't mean Chami and eCash, I mean eCash, the project you're working on, was when my cousin showed me his portfolio. He was super excited about 2 years ago, and he was like, "Oh, I have this eCash, and if it ever hits $1, I'm gonna be super rich." And I looked at it and I realized, okay, it has a super large supply and a low price.
I mean, effectively, it has the same supply of Bitcoin because this is a fork of Bitcoin, but we just moved the comma to the right.
Yeah,
Right. So
anyway,
you have the
so then
same
it's
number of
impossible.
Satoshi, except like one BTC is like 100 million Satoshi, and one XEG is going to be 100 Satoshi. So obviously, there is like a 1 million factor between the two.
Yeah, so basically having a dollar parity is almost impossible. You need a lot of money. I think more money
Yeah.
than
That would dollar parity would correspond to like a $1 million Bitcoin or something like that. That would be equivalent to that. So I would say it's not impossible, but it's highly unlikely. It's not going to happen next week.
So, are you happy with this experimentation, and are you aware of other projects conducting a similar approach or following the same path?
So there is obviously AVAX that maybe a lot of people are going to be knowledgeable about. AVAX is doing like pure Avalanche. They don't use anything else. They do everything with Avalanche. And so they have many of the same goodies that we can bring with Avalanche with their system. Now, the obvious problem with AVAX and the way they use only Avalanche is that you cannot bootstrap yourself in a trustless manner, right? So if I take the example that I had before, I go in the woods for like a couple of years. I don't have a computer or whatever. I go back and I want to connect my computer to the AVAX network and synchronize the chain. But I have no way of knowing what the real tip of the chain is. I need to ask some trusted party what is the state of the world, and then I can follow from there. But I was not there before to observe the consensus, so I have no way of knowing what the consensus was.
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to the 1,200 people who watched this so far on Twitter/X, and the 130 people who watched on YouTube. Thank you guys for tuning in. It's really cool. It's good to know that people care about these topics, even though some people ask you about price and the roadmap. Should I ask you about price and the roadmap?
Well, if you want, but I don't know that I have much to. Well, I have stuff to say about the roadmap, usually, but like it's funny because a lot of people reach to me and talk to me as if I was controlling the price somehow, but like nobody is. The market forces are controlling the price. Like this is what it is, and
Okay, and someone asks you if you have the capacity to deliver on your promises from the roadmap.
I mean, we think we do, otherwise we wouldn't put stuff in the roadmap. And if you look at what the roadmap was when we launched, you're gonna see that we delivered on several of the items that are on there.
Yeah. Now let me ask you about the scaling Bitcoin conferences because I guess you attended a few of them. What was your impression when you attended them?
I'm not sure actually. I think I attended one, but for the most part, I did not attend because that was always quite bizarre. Like those conferences, they happened after the fork, right? And they were like the scaling Bitcoin conference, but that was always quite bizarre to me because clearly at this point, Bitcoin had made a choice that they would prefer not change the rule and not scale as a result, and be some kind of digital gold of which the property we cannot affect. And I recognize that there is value in there, but uh, and obviously the market recognizes that as well. So, anyway, there is value in that, but once you go that path, you kind of like through scaling out of the window. I actually made a set of prediction in early 2017 before the fork. There was a presentation in French though, so I don't know if most people are going to be aware of it, but it was at La Maison du Bitcoin in Paris. And it was about why we're gonna fork and create BCH. And and many of the prediction were like, okay, if you don't remove the block size, you're effectively acting as a production quota on the transaction. And so here is like what economic textbook are gonna tell you happens when you have a production quota, right? And some of the stuff are like, well, you're gonna see that there is a gap between the price that people are willing to buy at and the price that people are willing to sell at. And why I say sell, like the producer, in this case, the miners, and uh, people in between are gonna be able to, impose themselves as intermediary and collect the difference. And it's what you see. The theory at the time is that this fee market would be created, and fee would be high and it would pay the miners. But as we see, there is no equilibrium point in the fee market, or the fee are exorbitantly high so that people leave the network until there is like sufficiently few people that want to transact that it fits in the block, and at some point the fee like go back to pretty much zero. There is no equilibrium point there. And so who takes the cut? It's actually not the miner. It's like intermediary that are going to be able to process transaction outside of the blockchain, like people like Coinbase that allows you to transfer from wallet to wallet from Coinbase user without really going through the blockchain. Or like ETF, sorry, is another example right now. I can buy a Bitcoin ETF and there's never any coin that moves, and I have an exposure to Bitcoin that way. So the prediction at the time, would say that, okay, you're not gonna see a fee market from the miner, you're gonna see expensive transaction fee, and you're gonna see like intermediary that pose themselves as custodial and operate the Bitcoins instead of the user. And this is what we've seen over the past several years. So this is something that always has been a bit disappointing to me. But anyway, right, like when you go that road, this is the road you're going to, and this is what's gonna happen. It's quite predictable actually, but to get back to the original scaling Bitcoin conference stuff, well, once you make that choice, you've decided that Bitcoin is not going to scale, and not just for technical reason, but also now they are a set of actors that have an incentive because they have part of their business model know that Bitcoin doesn't scale, and so therefore they can be an intermediary and take their cut. And so all those actors now they become economically incentivized toward like preventing any kind of scaling on Bitcoin. So it's not going to happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand the argument. And I like to argue, and I'm gonna get canceled for saying this, but for as long as Bitcoin doesn't scale to provide a trustless and not trustless, trust minimized, but self-custodial environment to the users, I guess having these altcoins that provide self-custody at a lower cost is fair game. Like Litecoin, I'm fine with Bitcoin Cash as long as it doesn't pretend to be the real Bitcoin. I think that was the biggest issue which emerged with the fork, and probably the reason why it didn't get much traction. It could have if it was presented as what it is, just a part
I
of the
think so,
community.
I think so. Like, but a more general point, like people were extremely antagonistic in the BCH community. They were at war with the whole ecosystem, which obviously is not the best way to make friends in the ecosystem, and convince people to to come over.
Yeah, and why did you decide to fork BCH?
It was becoming completely impossible to me. I think the straw that broke the camel's back, but it's one of those things that build up. There are many reasons, but the straw that broke the camel's back was there was this issue about chain transactions, and we knew that if we were changing that thing, it would be complicated to maintain down the road. So we were like, we need funding to be able to support that. And the problem is that like everybody was funded left and right in that ecosystem, but we never. Well, no, it's not true. We got some funding, but we didn't get like remotely enough funding to do the kind of maintenance that we were supposed to do. And so Roger Ver wanted that really bad. We were like, okay, like you have resources. If you make sure that we have the resources to do it and maintain it properly, we're gonna do it. But otherwise, we cannot. And Roger Ver ended up, making very public, statement in the community that he gave us a lot of money to do that, and that we refused to do it and stuff like that, which turned a lot of people in the community against us. But he never like the money that he says he gave us, he never gave us. It was a pure fabrication. So like once you're dealing with this kind of bullshit, and you don't have more media firepower than Roger can have, right? So at the end of the day, fighting that kind of battle is like I've frankly I have better things to do in my life than fighting this kind of battles, right? I was there to build something, so that was a bit the straw that broke the camel's back, but that was like a pattern that was building up over time. It was not the only incidence of that pattern, but it was probably one of the most egregious, instance of the pattern.
Yeah, I understand that your fork, which is called eCash,
Mm-hmm.
uses the Avalanche protocol. And were you going to propose this for Bitcoin Cash, or is this a novelty that came along the way?
No, it was in the roadmap for BCH pretty early on, even like before the BSV fork. Obviously, at the beginning, the Avalanche technology itself was not known. It was discovered later. So we were like, okay, we want to do that, but we didn't say at the beginning we want to do that with Avalanche because Avalanche did not exist. But when Avalanche came out, we were like, okay, like this does the same thing as what we wanted to do, but nicer. So we're gonna use that.
Is Avalanche developed by Emin Gunsirer, the guy from Cornell University?
So they work on AVAX, which is another project that used that consensus algorithm, but we have our own implementation of it that we implemented ourselves.
Okay, that's interesting to
You know,
know.
it's like you have Nakamoto consensus, and there are like a bazillion different projects that use Nakamoto consensus, and they all have their own implementation of it, and they maintain it, right? Right. It's the same. Like Avalanche is not like it's not a piece of code. It's a consensus. It's an algorithm.
The Caspers83 on YouTube wants to know how much extra bandwidth does Avalanche demand from nodes?
Honestly, not that much because it exchanges. It does everything with the hash of the element, like the hash of either the transaction or the block. So compared to the volume that you exchange in transaction themselves from block, it's not that much, though. It makes the whole stuff more latency dependent, right? So if you have a node with a high latency on the network, it's gonna impair your ability to participate in, like say, to take an extreme example, but let's say you have like 2-second latency. It's obviously that you're not going to be able to converge over the solution in 2 seconds like the rest of the network does, right? Because in 2 seconds, if you have 2-second latency, you're going to do just one round trip, and one round trip is not enough. So the constraint is more on latency than it is on bandwidth.
Yeah, that's very useful to know. And does this Avalanche protocol use proof of stake? Because it's something that we did not mention.
So yes and no. So the answer is yes, but not in the way people think it works. Like so, when people say proof of stake, usually what they mean is that it uses Nakamoto consensus, but instead of using proof of work, it uses proof of stakes, right? It's usually what people mean by proof of stake, and in that sense, no, it doesn't. But it needs a system to be Sybil resistant. So one of the problems you have in decentralized consensus algorithm is that what happens if one actor spin out like 1,000 node and pretend to be 1,000 different actors? How do you prevent that actor to take over the network? And proof of work is one way you do that, right? Because if you require each actor to do some amount of work, then the person to spin up like 1,000 node to have 1,000 times the weight, it needs to do 1,000 times the work. Doesn't matter how many nodes it has. And another way to solve that problem is to use proof of stake. It's like, okay, you had to prove that you own a certain amount of coin. And so now if you want to spin out 1,000 node, then you need 1,000 times more coins to do that. But you need to tie the node to some scarce resources for Sybil resistance. And so that is true both on Nakamoto and on Avalanche. But the proof of stake itself is not part of the, like creating a chain with a weight that is measuring proof of stake. So in that sense, it's different from like all the other proof of stake system out there except AVAX.
Did you add the Avalanche protocol because you're concerned about the hash rate being in a minority and you could get 51% attacks? Or do you still use SHA-256? That's another important question.
We still use SHA-256, yes. Avalanche protects us against 51% attack in that way. So that is a motivation, but that's not that's not the only motivation. And we were already talking about that on BCH when BCH was like, 10% of BTC. So with like very little risk of being 51% attacked. It solved just such a variety of problems. That it's valuable, right? Because for instance, it solved even on Bitcoin, you're like, okay, if you transfer a large amount of money, you're gonna wait for 6 confirmation, right? Well, on eCash, you just have to wait for 1 plus 2 seconds for Avalanche to run, right? And once you do that, the block is finalized, it's not gonna be a reorg. So that's just better user experience. And we are working on doing that at the transaction level. So once you do a transaction, like a few seconds later, boom, it's done. It's not going to be double spent. Generally, like what is interest for us is the digital cash aspect of it. And it's the name, right? It's eCash as in like electronic cash. So we are looking at anything that can improve the user experience for this type of use case. And Avalanche is really, really a really good fit there, right? Because I mean, like when you pay something cash to a merchant or whoever, the money cannot magically, go out of the pocket of that person and go back into your pocket, like, 10 minutes later by, by some kind of crazy consensus algorithm, right? That should not be possible, and that's possible on Bitcoin. So we think that it's a UX problem that needs to be solved regardless of the security concern. And the fact that it solved security concerns as well is, very nice added bonus. But even without the security concern, we'd be doing it.
Why did you decide to call this eCash? Because that was the name of the currency that David Chaum created in the 1990s. It's the first form of electronic cash being presented. And also an early version of Satoshi Nakamoto's Whitepaper was called eCash. Why did you go for this? I think it's a bit confusing for a new project to get this name.
No, so we like the eCash name. There was an early, as you mentioned, yeah, it was one of the early names considered by Satoshi, so we thought it was a good one. And we didn't think that the project from the 90s would be too much of an issue because it was like, it's more than 20 years ago now that it's been defunct. So, there's no possible confusion at this point, I think.
But I guess you can't own the domains for it.
Well, we have the e.cash domain.
That's fair, but I guess ecash.com has been taken for like 30 years.
Yeah, but it's not the Chaumian stuff either. Like it's some cyber squatter that is on there.
Oh, that's interesting. I guess these are the people who win in the end.
Yeah, it's someone, is like, okay, this is a good name. Someone is probably gonna want to buy it at some point, and I'm gonna sell it for a large amount of money. And it costs $20 a year to maintain the domain. So they do that with a lot of good names, and most of them they probably never sell, but the few that they sell, they're gonna sell for, I don't know, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or cost not how much, right? And it pays for a lot of other domain that never sell, right?
Yep. I have a dozen questions that you received on Twitter, but before that, I gotta present my favorite form of Bitcoin Cash, which is from Chip. It's a project made by two cool Belgian guys, Bastien and Baudouin, and you can listen to them in an interview that I did. They create this Sato Dime card, which is based on the Java card. It's NFC, so you can scan this on your phone. But you load this with Bitcoin and you give it to a friend, and it's truly peer to peer. It's a good way to onboard someone to gift them Bitcoin. And it's also a cool way for you to spend your Bitcoin without leaving a permanent trace on chain. You can make this change hands, and it has a physical seal. So if this is identified as being unsealed, you can consider that it has been compromised. And this costs less than €25. Use promo code BTCTKVR to get a 5% discount. And they also have all of these wacky rare Pepe designs if you're into this. I think the advantage that it has over a hardware wallet is the form factor, because it doesn't look like an electronic device. You can put this next to your credit card and pass national borders, and nobody's going to suspect that this is actually something that has something to do with Bitcoin. You can just say, oh, it's my membership card for this frog club or whatever. And if you want to put your private key on Steel, there's the Crypto Steel capsule. You can buy this one from cryptosteel.com and use promo code BTCTKVR to get 10% off. It's super cool. It's elegant.
No,
I
you've
like it.
revealed your private key on screen.
Yeah, this is my Noster private key right here. If you want to post as me, you have to read this. But it's super cool. I like it, and I wouldn't recommend something that I don't use myself. Let's put it this way. And now let's get to the part where I read questions from
Can
Twitter.
I say something quick before that?
Sure.
People, like, if you have large amount of crypto, you should consider one of those metal stuff, because paper wallet are a thing, but like, paper doesn't age very well. Are you confident that your piece of paper you've written stuff on it is going to be readable in 20 years? Like, it's sensible to water, it can burn, it can, like, there's just like so many things that can destroy it. And so the like, if you have large amount, consider like something like metal or something more durable than paper. James Homlop, I think, has a comparison of different of those metallic stuff to store your keys. He commoded like several different models from several different brands and submitted them to the harshness of treatment, like burning them and whatnot, and crushing them, and seeing out the results. So if you have a large amount of crypto, you should consider one of those.
Yeah, in Jameson Lop's test of this, actually the way that he was able to destroy it, so it was very good with water, fire, but he was able to bend it. And at that point, he was unable to open it. So it was a Schrodinger's cat sort of situation. He wasn't sure if the tiles are still intact or if they got bent and destroyed. So he bent it with a lot of power, a lot of pressure applied, and wasn't able to open it again to see what's inside. So
Yeah,
that
no, in
was the
his
only
test,
way.
he submitted those stuff to the harshness of treatment that they're probably never gonna go through in any realistic situation. But a flood or a fire or whatever in your house, that can happen. That sucks. Hopefully it doesn't. But you're already gonna lose a lot of shit if that happens to you. You don't want to lose all your crypto as well.
Yep. Thank you for helping me. Promo code BTCTKVR. Make me rich now. So let's take the questions. There's the Bitcoin Cash podcast. He wants to know, okay, you have previously said you still keep some BCH. Has there been any change in this stack? Did you sell it off or did you buy more recently?
I have not sold nor bought BCH in quite some time, but I'm gonna be honest, the hash ratio between BCH and BTC does not make me confident. This is something I've stated like a long time ago, but also the fact that the BCH community as a whole don't take that problem very seriously is probably something that's gonna end up in tears at some point. So I'm thinking about changing that. I've not done it at this point.
Do you have any thoughts on recent BCH community successes leading to price rises? I'm
I
not sure what
mean,
this means.
yeah, I think that person is referring to cash token and stuff like that. But I think the recent price action of BCH is not linked to that. I think it's linked to something we see, like every time there is an increase in price in Bitcoin and more interest and more people that use Bitcoin get clogged because Bitcoin doesn't scale very well. And at this point, people are like, well, the UX is terrible on there. What else there is? And part of that overflows to BCH later on. And it's almost like clockwork. Um, yeah, every single time since 2017 it happens. So I think it's another instance of that, and it's good for BCH. I mean, it means that it solved the problem, um, but I don't think all those people are coming because of cash token.
Also, the same guy behind the Bitcoin Cash podcast account wants to know, Do you have any prediction for the progress of BCH in the next 12 to 24 months?
Oh, that's very short time frame, so I don't know. Probably nothing really bad is gonna happen in that time frame, I would say. Though for the long term, I'm not very positive about BCH because I think the group that is in charge right now is the group of people that try to make big block on BTC and did not apply the right strategy. And I haven't seen that they have reconsidered their position very much. So they are probably gonna make the same mistake on BCH. So I have little confidence long term in BCH nowadays.
I forgot to ask you about this, and I think it's super important given your background and your expertise. What are your opinions on the Lightning Network?
I like it, but I don't think the way it was promoted as a general purpose scaling solution was right. Does that make sense? Like it does some use cases very well, but it's not a general purpose scaling solution. And I was a bit dishonest to promote it that way because even in there, I don't know if you watched the original presentation of Lightning Network from Joseph Poon and Tachiria, but they run some estimation number, and they were like, okay, if we want to make that work worldwide and scale, we're gonna need probably 300 meg blocks anyway.
What size can you say again?
300 megabyte
300
blocks.
megabyte blocks
Yeah,
for
this is
Lightning.
what they estimate they need with Lightning Network to make everything work. So I think their estimate is even a bit optimistic. I think, actually you would need even more than that. But um, we can always, debate the specific assumption that you make to come up with that number. But the point is, like, people, even in the early days of Lightning Network, knew that in itself it wouldn't be a sufficient scaling solution. Um, but on the other hand, it's really cool technology, and uh, it solve various use cases. Like any kind of like streaming amount of money, or any kind of like a security deposit, or like there are plenty of use cases that are very well served by the Lightning Network. It's just not a general purpose scaling solution for Bitcoin.
What do you think about the Liquid Federation?
I mean, not much. Not much actually. For me, it's not very interesting. That doesn't mean it's bad, or it's not gonna work or whatever. It's just not, it's a centralized system effectively, and allows to work around, like problem of scaling once again. And it fits in the pattern of stuff that I said. Like if you don't scale, you're gonna see this series of service that are gonna be more or less centralized. And to be fair to the liquid stuff, it's more on the less centralized side of things, rather than say a custodial system. But yeah, it's still one of those stuff I would, they solve a problem, but I would rather we don't need them.
Interesting. You also have a question from Anthony Banks in the chat. He says, when Bitcoin ABC hackathon? Let's gamify the search for the killer apps.
I mean, that's a great idea. I'm terrible at making those kind of stuff work. I'm gonna be honest. I'm more of a engineer kind of guy. And
By stuff, you mean hackathons or killer apps?
no, like it's not just a hackathon. Like, if you want to make a hackathon, you need to get people excited about it. Organize either a venue or something online or whatever, right? Like you need to create some social emulation around that, and it's just not something I'm very good at. So, but if someone wants to do that, that would be very, very supportive. That's a cool idea.
I want to ask you about something which might get very political, because actually, no, it's technical, but it gets political. So, the difference between ZeroConf and RBF, because RBF became super politicized and it became something that big block implementations of Bitcoin wanted to avoid at all costs.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I would say it's neither technical nor political. It's economics at play, right? Um, in Bitcoin, like you have it right now, RBF is unavoidable, right? Even if the core developer were to remove it from the node software, the miner would re-implement it behind their back, right? And they would use like a patch version of the node software that has RBF. Why? Because they make more money this way. And so you should not expect people to do the thing that make less money, right? Like, you know what I mean? It's obvious. And even if just one miner does it, well, know that miner has a competitive advantage, which means it's gonna grow larger and larger and control a bigger chunk of the network, up to the point where other miners are either gonna have to do it as well, or they are gonna be outcompeted. So in a way, like making that like a coding argument or a political argument about what's right and what Satoshi intended and whatnot is like it's wrong. Or it's not even wrong, actually. It's completely irrelevant, right? People are just gonna do it because this is what the incentives are. So if you don't want people to do that, you need to change the incentive so that they behave differently.
That's the most diplomatic answer I ever heard on the topic, honestly.
But I'm not saying that to be diplomatic. Like, I think this is true. Like, there are just economic incentives, and people are gonna do what what is in their best interest economically. You should expect that. Actually, Bitcoin rely on that, right? Like, Bitcoin doesn't work if miner doesn't follow their self-interest. They wouldn't buy the network otherwise, and nothing would work.
So why did this work in Bitcoin Cash? And is this part of the eCash roadmap to have
No,
zero halving?
I mean, the only reason it works on BCH is because the fee are low, and so doing it is not very profitable, right? A miner that would do RBF on BCH would not gain a very significant advantage over other miners because it's not running out of capacity to the point where fee are getting very high and so that it's profitable to do that. So this is why miners are not doing it on BCH. But if ever there is a fee event on BCH, or if BCH grows so much that there is a very large number of transactions, because fees is like miners make a lot of money from fee, either because the fee are high or because there are very large number of transactions that pay a low fee, right? It's a multiplication. So any of those two can grow. So, but if the fee gets high on BCH, either because the number of transactions get high or because the fee per transaction gets high, then people are gonna do RBF. You should expect them to.
You have a very mature and 150 IQ question from Cypher Hoodlum on Twitter, who says, ask him why he decided to work on shitcoins.
Well, why not? I mean, is the one saying it's a cheat coin? I don't think it's a cheat coin, right? But if everything not Bitcoin is a shit coin, that's I'm gonna change the angle a bit, but I find this very funny that you have people, either on Bitcoin and Ethereum also a bit, but to a lesser extent, that are like, if you're not Bitcoin, you're a shitcoin. And uh, it's very funny because the reaction from the legacy Bandkit system from Bitcoin when it came about was, exactly the same, right? And it's a bit unfortunate that those people have lost the plot to the extent that they have become what they wanted to fight originally, or replace.
So, what is a shitcoin to you? Or is there such a thing as a shitcoin?
I mean, I would qualify something as a shit coins if, the coins are just, it doesn't have anything. Like, the people are not trying to do anything new or building anything really, like if you just uh, uh, fork some existing code base and slap a dog's face on it, beside the first one, which is Dotcoin, and that was a funny project and everything, right? But when you do that for the 10th time, then like what is the value in there? It's a bit questionable. So I would say those are shit coins, but even then, like if people want to buy them, then good for them, right? Like, who am I to judge? We need to keep in mind that value is subjective, right? We are all valuing different things. And there is no reason to be judgmental, right? Like if someone values something that you don't, then they value something that you don't. There is not much more to that than that, right? Like they just value something different, and then what? It's a bit insecure, right? What does it say about the people that qualify everything as a shitcoin? I think it's like they are afraid that everybody's gonna leave for those alternatives that they see as not valuable. But that comes from a place of insecurity from the project you support.
Do you see this as sort of a Linux situation where you have open source forks of various distributions and clients?
Yeah, people like to debate those like forever. I have little interest in those. Yeah, and there is like Mac OS versus Linux as well, and there is Vim versus Emacs. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but developer, those are like text editor that developer use, and there are pages and pages and pages and pages of debates about which is best and whatnot. And you know what? Like, if you like one of them, just use it. Who gives a shit if you think it's better or worse than the other? I don't know. Like, this is not like when people get religious about those stuff, nothing very productive comes out of it.
Yeah, I guess. But at the same time, it has this monetary aspect to it, and people are expected to buy into something, and that something is expected to gain market utility, first of all, to be accepted as a form of currency, and then also gain some market capital, you know?
Yeah, but how much of those are used as currency these days, right? Like actually less than it used to. Like I don't know if you were in the space in say 2014 or so, but in 2014 you could buy like computer at Dell with crypto. And like crypto was Bitcoin at the time, right? There was only Bitcoin, so you could buy computer at Dell with Bitcoin. You could buy video games on Steam with Bitcoin. You could buy like any kind of random stuff on other stuff with Bitcoin. Like you could buy everything at Microsoft with Bitcoin. A lot of big, well-known name that would not consider accepting crypto today were accepting crypto at the time. So this is a use case that I've greatly receded, and there is probably enough room in there. Consider like the size that crypto use in the overall commerce and the size of the commerce as a whole. Like you'd have like 100 project doing 100x that you still wouldn't fill that space.
Let me spin this a bit. So why should someone use eCash instead of BCH?
Well, BCH right now is very much finger crossed engineering, right? And we've mentioned at least two aspects of that. One is the security aspect with reorgs and stuff like that. The second one is the zero conf stuff, which works right now because the chain is small enough, but if it gets bigger, it's gonna stop working. And BCH is not developing solution for that. It's actively ignoring the problem and yelling at anyone who's gonna point out that it's gonna be a problem. But that's not the way. That's not the way, right? Yeah, yeah, that's just not the way. You need to solve the problem. You cannot say, oh, like RPFs is bad, nobody needs to do it, or nobody must do it, and people who do it are very bad people. And then what, Like if people are rewarded for doing that, they're gonna do it. So what are you gonna do about it? You need to deploy solution for those stuff.
I think you started quite an interesting debate within the big block community when you proposed dev taxes. And was this part of the reason why you decided to fork off? Because you wanted to get paid basically for your work?
It's actually quite funny that people say that because I never took any money from that. It was used to pay also developers, but I never got paid from that thing. But nevertheless, like you need resources to build something good. And if people are not willing to provide resources, like if they say, oh, we don't want a self-funding mechanism, from the block reward. Okay, well, fine, but are you gonna pay for it? No. Well, someone needs to. Are you gonna convince someone else to pay for it? Are you what are you gonna do about it? Because if you don't want that, then the money needs to come from somewhere. I mean, if you look at how much money is spent maintaining BTC and Ethereum, it's probably at least 10 million a year for each that is spent on various development work that is required to do the maintenance properly. And where we were running BCH, we were saying that we need two, right? So that's quite a price, but that's also 5 times less than the big player in the space, right? So we were not, we were like quite economical in our approach, at least. But well, if we want to play in the same playing field as the big guys, well, this is the kind of money that we need to do the kind of work that is required to be there. And so, one way or another, it has to, but you cannot be in a situation where you are expected to play at that level while you have the resources of, like you have like an order of magnitude less resources than what you would need to play at that level. It's just not sustainable.
Okay, you also have a question from KDM_21mil on Twitter. He says, what's going to happen with the dev tax? It has already been increased. Will it further increase if the price drops? A council was promised. I would very much like to know if it exists now and who is part of it.
Oh, I saw that question on Twitter. So I answered that guy to a link with all the explanation about the council. So it exists. And if he wants to be part of it, then, he can just follow the link that it's like gnc.e.cash for if other people are interested. You go on there and there is all the explanation. And if you want to be part of the council or whatever, it's explained how to do it on there. So that's thing one. And half of the what people call the dev tax actually go to that council and they can allocate it. And will it draw or not? I don't quite know. But one thing that we've done, so here is the thing that I'm going to say about it. One thing that we've done in actually more than 6 months ago, or was it? I'm not sure of the date, but I think it was more than 6 months ago. We remove that mechanism from the consensus rules, which means that if people are unhappy about the situation, they can change it without causing a fork or anything. Like if everybody, if say you are not happy with the amount or even that we get anything or whatever, you can make a modified version of the node software. It's probably going to be less than 10 line of code to modify. And you publish that, and if enough people run it, then it's what it's going to be. Yeah, it's not a consensus rule anymore. So we are very, very fireable. Like we can be fired, and we've made it that one purpose, so that we are not baked into the consensus rule of the network.
Tanuki BTC wants to know how much did Jihan Wu pay you for the fork? And by the fork, I think he means BCH.
I mean, Jian was supportive of the stuff, and Bitmain did a lot of things, but it was not like Jian paying me to do the fork. I think that there is a bit of an implied assumption in the question that don't quite work.
Yeah, I guess it assumes that you received money directly and you executed the order. But I guess
Yeah.
it was a different turn of events.
No, yeah, we went over the course of event, right? I was working on extension block, and then there was SegWit 2x, and I thought that it didn't work, so I thought that we needed the minority fork, and this is the story.
David Shares is the angry one from the BCH community. He said, dang, he's still around, asking why he thought he could force a dev tax on users and think it would go okay. Does he consider himself a scammer? Many people do, including myself, think he's a scammer because he was trying to force a dev tax where the stolen funds went to him.
Okay,
Is any
well,
of this true?
consider that, David. When I was running BCH, like consider the price ratio between BCH and BTC when I was running it and what happened after we left. And you're gonna realize that you paid vastly more than the so-called dev tax. Like vastly more. I ran the number at the time, and I think like firing us cost the BCH community about $4.2 billion. It's a mind-boggling number.
So you mean that BCH lost market cap since you left?
Well, just just looking at the few months after that happens, like there was a very sharp declassment after the fork, and that declassment costed the BCH community about 4.2 billion. Yeah.
At BCH Autist says, pass my thanks for kicking out BSV with CTOR and CDS. What are CTOR and CDS?
Yeah, so I'm happy to answer that question, but I'm actually running out of battery. So if you would allow me to get a power supply, and then we can go for longer, because otherwise my computer is gonna shut
Yeah,
down.
sure,
I
sure,
don't know
sure.
when.
I'm just gonna... So I'm gonna look at the chat to see if there are any comments
Okay.
right now. And I'm gonna read them out loud, give people shoutouts. So, are you guys here? I see Silent Lamb that he sent his hellos. And I see some questions which he already answered. I see some names that I can't read. I'm not sure what language this is, but you guys seem excited about this interview, so thank you for tuning in. If you haven't already, and I'm gonna talk about this until he returns, check out Wasabi Wallet at wasabiwallet.io. It's a pretty cool privacy wallet for your Bitcoin, and it does some cool tricks with creating different denominations from the Bitcoin that are part of your inputs. There are some very cool use cases if you don't want everyone to know how many coins you have, or maybe you withdraw from an exchange and want to put that into self-custody, and you're not happy with the exchange knowing all about how much Bitcoin you own and where you send it. You can send it into a few rounds of coinjoins, and it's gonna be pretty private. Just make sure you don't consolidate the entire amount afterwards, and you send every UTXO individually to your cold wallet or whatever you use. Also, check out hodling.ch if you're a whale, you're a company, and you want to do multi-sig for your users or shareholders. They have all the solutions that will help you set that up. They're based in Switzerland. They have expertise in the stuff. I know the CTO of the company, Polto. He's a very cool guy, and he spends a lot of time hacking and looking at hardware wallets and trying new stuff. I have a lot of respect for him, and I got this sad because I became friends with him after a conference, and it's pretty interesting. So check that out. It's hodling, HODLING.ch. And if you want to turn your Bitcoin into cash, something that you can give to someone as a gift, or something that you can pay in person, check out Satodyme by Satochip. It's SATOCHIP.io, Satochip.io, and you get a Satodyme, and you can basically put Bitcoin on it and give it to a friend. And it's a nice way to gift Bitcoin without leaving any sort of permanent trace on the public blockchain, because that's a big concern. Plus, the transaction fees are pretty high these days, so it works pretty well also as a scalability solution. On a local level, you meet people, you give them your card, and that's an efficient way to make payments. Use promo code BTCTKVR for 25% off. And also, as Amaury also said, consider using this sort of metal backup for your seed phrase. I'm pretty sure that if you have any coins, you have a BIP39 seed phrase or a private key, and it's useful to put this on some sort of metal backup that's resistant to fire, to flood, to earthquakes, or any kind of natural disaster. I see that you're back, Amaury.
Yeah,
I just
I have the
presented.
power.
Yes, you have the power. And there's another comment from Twitter. Dino Animal? Dino the Animal. He says, any regrets? And I'm trying to understand the context of this. If you can provide more context, Dino the Animal, any regrets about what? And the question that you're about to answer. Oh, it refreshed.
Yeah, so
I
that
have to
was
scroll again.
CTOR and
CTOR and CDS from Bitcoin Cash Autist.
yeah, in Bitcoin originally, or it was made by Satoshi, the transaction in the block can be in pretty much any order. There are some constraints on the order, but pretty much any order. And one thing that we did with BCH and that we also do with eCash is that we use CTOR. CTOR stands for Canonical Transaction Ordering, which means that if you have a set of transactions in the block, they can be there is only one order in which they can be, right? And that seems that it wouldn't change very much, but it actually changes a lot because now your block is a set of transactions rather than being a vector or an array in computer science terms. And when you have to transmit the block over to another node, if you have one canonical transaction ordering, if you tell the other node, here is what the transactions that are in the block, the other node can reconstruct the block. But if the transaction can be in any order, you need to transmit not only what transactions are in the block, but also in what order they are. And what happened in practice is that you know the transaction and the other node also knows the transaction, right? Because the transactions are also propagated on the network. So telling the other node what transactions are in the block can be very, very cheap because you have a lot of shared knowledge between the two nodes that we can leverage ahead of time. But telling them in what order they are, not only it's not cheap, but it grows faster than the size of the block, right? It's 10 log n in technical terms. So it gets worse. Like if you make the block twice as big, it's not twice as hard to transmit the ordering. It's worse than that. It's worse, it's worse than twice as hard. So that's a scaling problem, and CTOR just get rid of that problem. CDS is an opcode, is check data sig, so it's also something that we have on both on BCH and on eCash. It's an opcode that allows you to verify signature on arbitrary data. There are just a lot of use cases that spawn out of that, some of them that we didn't even anticipate, which is always good, that a good sign that a tool is useful. So those are two additions that are very welcome. I think no core in one of the recent soft fork have something similar to CDS, but obviously they cannot have CTOR. It's not possible. It's a hard fork. It's a bit unfortunate. And I think the question mentioned Craig Wright as well. And so Craig Wright was opposed to CTOR. To be honest, I'm not quite convinced that he understands what it is or why it's useful or whatnot. I think he needed an excuse to fork, and this is the excuse that he found.
Yeah, I'm happy about this explanation, and I was reading some of the other comments, and they were saying, "Oh, you brought the guy who forked Bitcoin. Are you gonna bring Alex Mashinsky and SBF next, and Craig Wright?" I'm like, I don't think these people. First of all, I don't think they listen to this to learn or understand what this is about, and I don't think they understand the difference between a developer and a business person and the marketer, because
No,
there are
but
different layers to this.
also I want to say, like, people, come on, like, grow up. There is a difference between someone that disagree with you or even want something different than you do and a scammer. That's not the same thing.
Yeah, you also told me, and I guess this is confidential and private, but you also told me that a certain Bitcoin core developer reached out to you and told you, why don't you come back to Bitcoin? And you told him, I'm doing something else and I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I have good relationship with not all the Bitcoin developers. Some of them I just don't know them, right? But I have good relationship with several of them, and uh, I don't know. It's not because we disagree on what we want to build that we need to be enemies.
But aren't you here to get rich, Amaury? Because I guess you could have much more money today if you just held your Bitcoin instead of forking and then working on something which was underappreciated
Yeah,
and then
but
waiting another fork.
here's the thing. I have something that most people will never have. It's enough.
Oh, that's a tough statement right there. You're saying you have enough to support yourself and
I mean,
not.
I'm not clearly not as rich as someone like Roger or whoever, right? But I've had a good career. I did well for myself. I have enough to not be counting every euro. So I'm good. Like at some point, you need to build the stuff that you want to be building because they don't exist in the world, and you would like the world better if they existed. Uh, and it's okay to not maximize the dollar number past a certain point. Actually, I think there are research that show that up to a certain point, having more money makes you happier, but there is a point at which the effect, like like temper off, right? Because at some point you have enough money to cover your needs, and there are more interesting stuff that you can be doing.
Do you still hold Bitcoin? And
Yes,
would you have more money in fiat terms right now if you just held Bitcoin instead of going into BCH?
maybe, but that's not a given, right? Because you would expect, like if nothing at all would have happened in that alternative timeline, then probably. But the thing is, like a bunch of stuff would have happened in that alternative timeline as well. Um, so I don't, I don't think that's. I don't think I necessarily would have more money.
So are you saying that the fork has actually helped Bitcoin?
I think so.
In
I think
which
so
way?
because you had two group of people that wanted to be different things and they were forced to be together, and it was very dysfunctional.
So you describe it as a divorce that was necessary.
Yeah, yeah.
You don't believe that the big blockers can ever come back to Bitcoin. But I don't think it's about large block, right? It's about the use cases, how you use your Bitcoin
Yeah,
and the
I like
UX.
the different. Yeah, it's not a technological difference. It's a difference in value. As long as you value the monetary property of the system, or you value its immutability. And I think one of the things that the big blocker failed to see, and they would greatly benefit from seeing it, is that there is value in a system that is never going to change, right? So I know that tomorrow I get hit by a car, I go into a coma, I wake up in like 15 years. Well, my Bitcoins, I know exactly what they're going to be, right? They're going to have the same characteristics as today, right? Exactly. It's not going to change. My BCH, my eCash, my whatever else, I don't know, right? And probably they're going to be better in terms of their characteristic than what they are right now. But maybe someone is going to fuck it up along the way, and they won't exist anymore. Or, like there's just an infinity of stuff, or it's going to move in a direction that I don't approve of, right? But some other people approve of. Um, I don't have that kind of guarantee of what those other stuff are going to look in many years. And same for Ethereum, by the way. Like, cannot even predict what the monetary policy is going to be on Ethereum in 15 years. And on one hand, having that possibility to evolve things, that's the possibility to make them better. But that removes the predictability of it. And predictability has value, right? This is something that you can value.
If you
And
did not create the BCH fork, do you think that someone else was going to do it?
while the details of it probably would have been different, but I think someone would have created something that, is Bitcoin with larger block. I think so, yeah. But
What is
probably
the
after Segwit 2x failed, right? Like, what would have happened at like Segwit 2x failed, everybody gets super pissed off. This is manipulation. We had like another chapter to the grand conspiracy theory story. And at some point, people get sufficiently pissed off so that they go their own way. And maybe that would have been better. I don't know. But yeah, it would have looked quite different, but it would have happened at some point, I think.
Kale on Telegram actually messaged me. He is the creator of Cashew, and he wants to know if you sold all of your BTC for BCH at the fork.
Not all of them. I sold some, but not all of them. Because I mean, like, you never know. It was probably not such a bad idea. I also did a fair amount of arbitrage because the price at the beginning were all over the place. So tracking everything down would be quite difficult nowadays. But like, because the price was so different between different exchanges, I did a lot of trade back and forth between BCH and BDC at the time. It would be very, very difficult to retrace everything properly.
But do you have any regrets that any of this happened? Or is there anything you
No,
would do differently?
so I've asked my question quite a bit, like, what would I do differently? And I think there are a lot of stuff that I could have done differently, but I don't think it would have changed like a lot of the different intermediary steps, but I don't think it would have changed the outcome.
That's a very
So
interesting
I
perspective.
have not too many regrets. I have regrets about, some details and some way of doing some of the things, but overall, no, I don't have that much regrets.
What is the current state of Bitcoin ABC? Is it entirely focused on eCash?
Yes.
Are you still the dictator, quote unquote, of the project?
Yeah, it's funny because it's something like some people got very, I don't know, riled up by that term, but benevolent dictator for life, like, there is an article on Wikipedia about it. It's a very common way of referring to the leader of an open source project. So I don't know, it's not even remotely as remarkable as people think it is.
I took a look at the cash price when we started, and I took a look again right now, and we had no impact on the price. So I think this is a net positive. I was worried that people are gonna speculate based on your replies, and I see that in the last hour it went down 1%, but probably this is correlated with lots of other market movements. We are witnessing a pretty bearish
I
moment
mean,
in
in the
this.
crypto market, 1% is like pretty much negligible, right? It's like within the noise.
What is the current state of other big block implementations like Unlimited, XT, and is there any other one? Classic?
So XT doesn't exist anymore. And Classic doesn't exist anymore as well. So there is BU, Bitcoin Unlimited, and they have created their own coin now. They call it Nexa, and I don't know if they still support BCH or what. I don't know what they're doing, but Bitcoin Unlimited was always a bit of weird place with people with strange IDs in there. The main node that works on BCH right now is BCHN, and it's a fork of Bitcoin ABC.
So who's working on BCH right now?
Not so many people. I think there is Kalin. I don't know if Frustrator is still around. There are some people working in the ecosystem, but on the node itself, not that many people are working on it.
Because I did read that it has some sort of roadmap, right? And that's kind of centralizing when you think about it, but it's also proof that these developers are committed and want to ship something
Yeah,
for
no,
the funding that they get.
I don't think the roadmap is necessarily centralizing, right? So people have to congregate around something, and typically it's gonna be like other people, right? So you have a leader, and we do whatever the leader say, or it's gonna be some kind of bureaucracy or institution. It's like, okay, we have a process to make decisions, and the decision made by the process are what they're gonna be, right? Like it's like administration work that way. Or otherwise, you have like a goal. We're going there. If you want to come there with us, then come along and help us. And it's gonna be the roadmap way of doing things. No, obviously the congregating around a person is by definition gonna be centralized, right? The one like the bureaucratic way of doing things, depending on how you organize the bureaucracy, is gonna be either decentralized or centralized, but it's always very inefficient, right? Like bureaucracy are inefficient by design. So now you have left the project or the roadmap way of doing things. If you want to build that thing, then like come with us. If you're interested, come with us. Otherwise, well, you can do something else, right?
Yeah, there's also Calais. I mentioned him previously. He's the one who
Mm-hmm.
asked you if you sold your BTC for BCH. And he's working on something that's called Cashew, and it's an eCash. It's a Chaumian eCash system for Bitcoin. And he says that there's a lot of confusion that happens when he mentions that he works with Chaumian eCash because people think that he is working on your coin. So in this regard, he disagrees when you say that people will not confuse eCash with Chaumian eCash. He says it doesn't really make things easier to have to explain to people that there is an altcoin that also calls itself eCash. Do you have any comment on this? It's not a question from him, it's just a comment that he
No,
says
no,
it.
well, but I don't quite know what to say. His stuff is not, it's not the eCash project as well from Shom originally, right? So, well, what can I say, right? And I don't know. I don't know if there is very much to add. I understand what he's saying. I understand his position, and I understand that it's annoying, but I don't know. I don't know. There is much more to add to that, right?
So, who chose the name eCash? Was it you?
I'm not quite sure. We are brainstorming various names. I know that was my number one choice, but I don't think it was me. But I ran with it because I thought it was a good name.
Yeah, as we mentioned previously in a very early version of the Bitcoin whitepaper that Satoshi was sending around to people before it got published, he was calling it eCash.pdf. It's a document that he was sending of the
Hmm.
whitepaper, an early draft. He was calling it eCash because he was trying to fix this double spending problem to something that was inherently centralized in the 90s. This is why, in some ways, Satoshi Nakamoto is regarded as the guy that solved the holy grail of digital cash that
Yeah, and
cypherpunks wanted to use.
I don't know if you know that, but there is actually a proof, like a mathematical proof, that solving the double spend problem is impossible.
Go on.
So as a result, a lot of people thought that it was impossible. And technically, in the mathematical sense, the proof is correct. But where Satoshi was smart is that the system actually never really converges, right? So what happens is that as you pile more and more blocks on top of a decision, you are more and more certain then your transaction that has been mined in the block is not going to be reorged by a double spend, right? But you never reach 100% in the mathematical sense of the term, right? You're going to reach like 99.99999 something, right? So in that sense, Satoshi solved the problem for all practical purposes, but it's not solved in the mathematical sense of the term. And it's actually impossible to solve in the mathematical sense of the term. Like you probably cannot reach 100%.
Oh, a spicy question in the chat. Steve Spiller wants to know where and when did you get your economic education?
I mean, over the years, when I was a student, actually hesitated going into engineering or psychology or economics, and I went into engineering. But I was an interest for those other topics, and I studied them on the side as well.
Okay. Do you consider yourself an Austrian economist of sorts? Do you adhere to that school of thought, or are you more into the cypherpunk side where you just want to send money electronically without a trusted third party?
It's a bit of a difficult question because so I'm definitely on the cypherpunk side of it, but I would say I'm mostly on the Australian economic side of it. But people put different meaning in that term exactly, so it's a bit difficult. But I would say yes, yes to both actually. Yeah.
Well, if you take it to the literature of Austrian economy, being an Austrian economist means loving gold and thinking that it's the best form of money. The way in which it was adapted for Bitcoin is sort
Not
of a hybrid, you know?
not really. I would say like if you read the Australian economists, yeah, they say that money should have like a certain set of properties. And before crypto, gold was definitively the form of money that, as that's the characteristic that matched the ideal form of money as described by Dr. Ryan the best. But crypto, if it scales, is match actually those characteristics better. And if we go back to that famous conference in Arnhem, where we discussed earlier, where I asked Craig Wright about opcode separator, I made a presentation at that conference where actually I announced that I would fork Bitcoin and create BCH. And during that conference, at the start of it, I'm making exactly that point, right? I'm like, okay, what are the characteristics we expect of money from economists? And what I say from economists is like mostly from Australian economists, because if you if you ask modern monetary theory people, they're gonna give you a very different answer. But if you ask traditional Australian economists, they're gonna give you like a series of characteristics that money can have. And I show that both fiat and gold have some of those properties to some extent. But each of them don't have all the properties. And if we can have a cryptocurrency that scales very well, we can have a form of money that have all those properties.
Yeah, this is where I disagree with Roger. When he was on my show last week, he mentioned that people want to save the currency that they use for spending. And when you deal with fiat currencies, you don't really want to save that. At least, I come from Romania. My parents lost their wedding money because they saved it, and something that could buy them a car on day one ended up buying them a couch a couple of years later.
Yeah.
So you get all of these examples from history and from personal experiences with people around you, and realize, okay, I should not be saving in this. And then you discover that gold is also hard to store and transport and has some of its issues. So you gravitate towards Bitcoin once it makes sense to you. But I'm not sure about this whole debate about. I don't think it's mutually exclusive or exclusionary.
Yeah.
When you say
So
medium of exchange and store of value, you say no, it should only
no,
be this.
it's actually not only it's not mutually exclusive, it's actually the same thing. It's like transporting value as or across space and time.
Now you sound like Michael Saylor.
No, but like the store of value property is being able to send money in the future.
Yeah, that's a good point because it's gonna be used. It's
Right. So it's like the store of value property is just the medium of exchange property on the different axes.
yeah, I can agree with that, except for the people who say, "Oh, I'm never gonna spend any Bitcoin. I have it in cold storage
So
forever." And
this is one of the reason I put some, some caveat around saying I'm an Australian economist, because a lot of people are mentioning Gresham law when it comes to Bitcoin. And being like, okay, I'm an Australian economist, I understand Gresham law, blah, blah, blah. But actually, 99% of those people don't understand Gresham law, and they draw the wrong conclusion there. Gresham law is like good money drives the bad. Like if you have two form of money, you're gonna spend the one that devalues, and therefore the one that you cannot spend is better. That's essentially the argument that is being made. I'm simplifying it a bit, obviously, but that's the gist of the argument. And there is a key element of Gresham law that they ignore, is that Gresham law assume that there is parity between the two forms of money. So
parity in quantity or in their valuation.
there is a fixed exchange rate,
Okay.
right? So if there is a fixed exchange rate between two forms of money, but one of them is inflating and the other one is not inflating, well, you want to spend the one that is inflating and keep the one that is not inflating. But if there is not a fixed exchange rate, then just one loses value compared to the other, because people don't want to accept it as well. Like Gresham law rely on the fact that there is a fixed exchange rate. It doesn't work in a context of a variable exchange rate.
Let me ask you this, Amaury, because we have been on this for how long? Let me refresh
Like
to
almost three
see.
hours now.
Yeah, it's been pretty long, and I'm super happy that you answered all the questions and you're super patient with everything. If you were not working on eCash right now and you were coming back to Bitcoin to work on something, which project do you think is most worthy of your time? Something that is promising and something that gives you hope about the Bitcoin project?
Outside of eCash, outside of eCash, I probably would have to join Paul Stork and work on Drivechain, I would say. Like if I were a new developer joining right now, this is probably what I would look into.
Interesting. What's your take on these federations and fediments and whatever, which give you privacy, speed, but compromise on verifiability because then there's no way for you to prove that the money actually exists. You can't verify. You can verify the supply, and you also have no censorship resistance because you have to trust in the custodian of the funds, basically the bank. Are these still Bitcoin or are they something else?
I mean, I think the good we explained many times for eCash when people are asking about privacy and whatnot. It's like whatever the privacy system that you use, right? Whether it be uh, one like you described, or a zero knowledge, or something with ring signature like Monero, like whatever it is, you're gonna lose auditability, right? You have to. This is the whole point. This is the whole point, right? You cannot audit the chain anymore. And so in itself, it's not a bad thing, right? It's like another system in which you value privacy more than auditability, and it's fine. But it's important to keep the two segregated in some way, because people are going to value the auditability of Bitcoin 100%. But a Bitcoin that you can move into one of those systems and get back into Bitcoin later on is a more valuable Bitcoin, I think. Because if that system explodes, well, just the just the thing on the side explode, and the main chain is remain unscathed. You can just like put it on the
Did you have
side.
time to look into rollups? Because they seem to be overhyped these days. Everyone's building something with ZK rollups.
Rollups is, I want to say, similar to Lightning Network, not in the like the tech is completely different, but in terms of the characteristics and limitation that they're gonna have, it's pretty similar. You need to be able to commit on the chain at any point. It's like dependent on the security of the thing. So when the chain is clogged, you have issue. You also have a liquidity issue as a result, right? Because what is in a payment channel or in a rollup or whatever is not in another rollup, is not in another payment channel or whatnot. So if you want to use that as scale, you end up having liquidity issues. And those two problems we see today, both with rollups and Lightning Network, and because they are economic problems, they are not technical problems. So even though the technical aspect is like 100% completely different, the economical problem is the same.
So you're basically saying that it doesn't scale as promised. It's gonna become very expensive for the
More
average user.
specifically, I think it scale some specific use cases, but it's not a general purpose scaling solution.
That's interesting. But do you think sidechains are much better? Or are they some sort of utopia? Because we have some sidechains in Bitcoin and people say they're not real sidechains and they're supposed to be trust minimized.
Well, Drivechain is like a form of sidechain effectively that is more trust minimized than the current sidechain that we have. I don't think sidechain is a scaling solution per se, but because you can create sidechain with different consensus rules, you can have a sidechain with consensus rule that scales better than the main chain and use that for scaling. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Just like you can make a sidechain that have zero knowledge capabilities that is going to give you privacy. It's not going to fix privacy on the main chain, but if you want some privacy, you can use that side chain and the main chain remains unaffected.
Let's do a recap of what we talked about for the people who joined later, because we have 2,000 people who have watched this on Twitter/X and 200 who watched on YouTube. So the difference is on a scale of 1 to 10, or 10 to 1, depending on which one you choose. Basically, Amaury, you are responsible for forking Bitcoin into Bitcoin Cash, but you're never political. And you always saw this as some sort of minority chain that tries something different. And you maintain the same mindset with your latest project, which is eCash.
Yeah, so I mean, like ideally, I would have liked big blocks to happen on BTC, right? But you get to be realistic about what is possible. And if a lot of people don't want that, then it's not gonna happen, and you gotta live with it, right? So then you do a minority chain.
But you also helped with the inflation bug in 2018 when you found out about it and you participated in the team that audited the code.
I was not the one who discovered the bug, to be very clear, but I knew about it before it was public. Some other developer found the bug.
Yeah, you're on the mailing list. You found out about it. You're one of the first.
Yeah, I found out about it in the
world.
sense that I learned that it existed, not that I dug into the code and I am the one that made the discovery.
Still, you did not exploit the vulnerability, and you worked with the team to look at the code and fix it.
Yeah.
And you thought it's more important to have a good reputation than to be the one who causes a hard fork in Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why destroying value would. It's not what I'm there for.
And you're
also probably why I want all those mailing lists to begin with, right? If I was the kind of people that with that knowledge would try to use it to attack, people would not share that knowledge with me to begin with. or
And
maybe
you're
months, you
also
know.
one of the first people in the big block community to figure out that Craig Wright is not Satoshi.
Yeah, but many people still believe it.
Yeah, but you asked him the right questions and you found out that
Hmm.
there's no way for the creator of Bitcoin to not know this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Did you ring the alarm immediately or did you let people get fooled further?
So I was not very vocal about it. So, you know, when asked, I would say that I don't think Craig is Satoshi and all of that, but um right or I don't know if that this is one of the things, I don't know if that was right or wrong, but the impression was that if I make a big fuss about it, in many ways is gonna make like even more publicity for the guy and helping, you know, become bigger. So I was always, you know, like wondering like how much do I need to, you know, call the guy a scammer, whatever, and how much I need to just like do what I'm doing and keep on chugging along. And I did a bit of the first, but I did more of the second than I did of the first, because I thought that, you know, it would bring more spotlight on the guy. And this is one of the things I don't know if that was right or wrong. I yeah, I genuinely don't know. Maybe it would have been better to be more vocal about the guy sooner. In private though, I was very vocal about it to many people who I thought were, you know, valuable people who were in that train, but with mitigated success, I might add.
Before starting this interview, you told me something interesting that you believe that most history that's written about Bitcoin these days is manufactured and from the perspective of a very wealthy person who has a vested interest in changing the facts.
Yeah, and when you say a wealthy person, I'm not thinking about, you know, like there are several sources of story, right? And each of them are going to be by a wealthy person, but not necessarily always the same one. Just want to make that clear. I'm not like making veiled, you know, underhanded comment about someone specifically. But yeah, I think like most of the things that is being written today about this period in time in history is motivated more than, I mean, like motivated by various goals that the people who wrote those story have than actually by telling the truth. So yeah, most of the stuff that I've read on the topic are not very accurate.
Is the book The Block Size Wars accurate? Or to which extent do you think it is? Or have you read it?
So I have not read it first. I've read some, you know, extract of it that people have been sharing. Um, as far as I can tell, it's somewhat biased, but it makes an effort not to be too much, at least in the excerpt that I've read.
There's also
So
the
it says
book by
probably not.
Roger that's coming out this week, and it's going to
So
tell
this
the other
this one
side
I've
of the
not
story.
read, but I know Steve Patterson, and I have zero trust in Steve Patterson to tell an accurate story.
Oh, really? So
Yeah,
you're dismissing the book before it even comes out?
I mean, I cannot dismiss the book per se because I have not read the book, right? So I cannot tell you 100% this is sure this book is a pack of lies and inaccuracies and whatever, because I cannot know that. I have not read the book. But I know that I have a history with Steve Patterson where he can be creative with with his story and the way events occur.
So, what do you believe is the most accurate source of history? And how can I get to these people and ask them and interview them on this show? Because I'm trying to tell the story from as many points of view as I can and document the events.
Yeah, so I may try to put you in touch with some of those people, but there have been so much mudslinging that many of those people they just, you know, don't want to be bothered anymore. That's a bit of the reason as well why the story about it is somewhat inaccurate. But I can try to put you in touch, and if they want to, they can participate. But I cannot guarantee that the people that were there at the time we want to.
I've been trying to get to Jeff Garzik for months. I was in his Twitter comments. I asked someone I know who knows him to basically connect us through an email, and he sent this introduction email in which I was tagged, and I sent my message. He did not respond. I hope I'm gonna get him at one point because I'm pretty sure he has a long story to tell. He was the first
Yeah.
developer to propose a block size increase in Bitcoin back in 2010, and Satoshi was aware of it and said, "Don't run this code because it's not gonna be in consensus with the rest of the
Mm-hmm.
network." And then he pursued this goal of increasing the block size up to SegWit 2x. He was the architect behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then I
I
guess he
think
gave up.
Jeff Garzik would be an interesting person to interview on the topic, and he tends to be not too political as well, as far as I can tell. So um, like he's doing his stuff in his company now. He doesn't have a vested interest in the outcome of that debate. So I think he would be a good person to talk to. Yeah.
And I want to thank you for your time. I basically freeloaded on it. I took a lot of it. I asked you every question I could think about
No
a
problem.
lot of topics.
I've cleared my evening for that today, so that's fine.
And I appreciate that you were honest to the extent that you took it to a very technical level. You did not want to talk about people or events or something like this. You explained why from a technical point of view, and this is something I can respect. And your fascination with creating internet money that combines different ideas that were not tried together before, I also respect that. So good luck with your eCash, and maybe one
Thank you,
day
and good
you're
luck with the
gonna.
podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, how can people follow you? This is another question.
Well, I mean, like Twitter is where I'm gonna be the most easy to join, I guess.
It's
So
Deadalnix.
yeah. So yeah, you can put the Twitter on the left and right, and you know that name is the same on GitHub. It's the same on like if there is that name somewhere, it's or me or someone trying to impersonate me, but probably it's me.
Does Deadalnix mean anything?
No, it doesn't mean anything.
Is it Deadalnix? Deadalnix? How do you
Eh,
say it? If you
I'm the
ever
right
say it.
writing it. I'm not the one saying it, so you
You
decide.
never said it in your head in any way?
Not really.
That's strange. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. This was a great interview. I found out a lot from you. And I guess maybe I'll invite you some other time to a debate or something that can be spicy also.
Okay.
So if you haven't already hit that like button or subscribe or do whatever, it helps.